Hello and welcome to Plant Crafted Pantry. Today we are canning vegan baked beans. So first we need to soak our beans, and I'm going to soak these for 24 hours, so I'm starting the day before I want to cook them. I have 2 pounds of navy beans here, and first I'm just picking through them to remove any bad beans or pebbles, and then I'm giving them a good rinse. And then I divided them into 2 half-gallon jars and covered them by about double with water. And then I'm adding a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar per cup of dried beans. Each pound is about 2.5 cups, so I added 2.5 tablespoons of vinegar to each jar. And then I will put the lids on and let them rest. I let them soak for 24 hours total, and I did drain, rinse, and replace the soaking water and vinegar about halfway through. So now it's been about 24 hours, and I'm draining and rinsing them for the final time. And then adding them to a large stock pot for cooking, along with 6 quarts of water. And then I put those on this stove and brought it to a boil, and then reduced the heat to low, and now I'm just skimming out any of the skins that have floated to the top. I didn't have a lot of foam with these, but if you do get foam, skim that off as well. These simmered for about 2 hours until they were tender, and then I drained them, reserving 4 cups of the cooking liquid in my large measuring cup. And then I added the beans to my 6-quart pot that had 3 large onions that I had chopped up, and I'm just giving those a quick stir. And then to our reserved liquid, I'm adding 2/3 of a cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of salt, 2 teaspoons of dry mustard, and 1/3 of a cup of molasses. I also added about 1.5 teaspoons of liquid smoke for flavor, since the original recipe calls for bacon and we are veganizing these. So just whisking that all together, and then I will pour that over our beans. The recipe says not to stir it, so I just poured it over and then put the lid on my pot and put it in the oven, which I had preheated to 350 degrees. These bake for 3.5 hours. So now we're getting close to the end of that bake time, and I had a request to show how I heated up my jars in my Nesco Smart Canner using the brown setting. So I have the canning rack on the bottom, and I added the 8 cups of water that the canner requires for pressure canning. Added my clean jars. We're using pints here, so 5 of these will fit in the canner, and then press the brown button and then start. And then once it came up to a boil, I didn't want it to keep boiling, so I turned it off by hitting the stop button and then closed the lid to just keep that heat in while my beans finished baking. So here are the beans after they came out of the oven, and we'll go ahead and get those in the jars. So I took the jars out of the canner. They're still nice and hot. And I started filling them with the beans. And then debubbled and checked the headspace. And these require 1 inch of headspace. And then I wiped off the rims of the jars with some white vinegar and cleaned up any spills down the outside of the jars, and added some new canning lids, and then screwed on the rings to fingertip tight. And then we'll get these put back in the canner. I added a splash of white vinegar to the canning water just to keep my jars a little bit cleaner. And then I closed the lid and made sure the dial is set to exhaust. And then we will press high for pressure canning. And then the canning time for these is 80 minutes. So we'll set that and press start. And then I did have some beans left over, so I went ahead and put those in jars too, just to see how many we ended up with. And I was able to fill 2 more jars. So I ended up with 7 pints total. I didn't can those last 2 jars. I had one for dinner, and then I put the other one in the fridge to eat a couple days later. When it starts steaming, the display will go to E10 and we'll count down the 10-minute exhaust. When it gets to 0, we'll switch the dial to airtight. And then after it comes up to the correct pressure, it starts the timer. After the time finished, I let the canner cool down for another couple hours, opened the lid, let it rest for a couple minutes, and then it's time to take the jars out. So here's what they look like straight out of the canner. I let these rest overnight, and then the next morning I went ahead and took off the rings, checked the seals, gave my jars a good wash, and then labeled them with the contents and the date, and got these 5 jars of baked beans up on my pantry shelf. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye.